First light of Ouagadougou's sun touched the palace walls golden, calm, proud. But beneath that light, the sound of armored engines broke the peace of my homeland. I watched as the dust of our red earth rose, like the spirits of our ancestors awakened by injustice. American vehicles surrounded the home of our people, their formation cold and precise, but their presence foreign and arrogant. From the window of my office I saw our flag, red, white, and green, still standing against the pale morning sky. It did not tremble. It did not bow. It reminded me that no weapon can silence a nation that remembers who it is. Above, helicopters circled like metal birds, bringing with them fear and arrogance. Our people, vendors, mothers, workers, fled from their morning labor, leaving behind fruits, colors, and dreams. Even the ancient baobab tree seemed to lean closer to the palace, guarding this land as it has done for centuries. Aminata, loyal to her duty, rushed into my office. Her breath carried both fear and courage. She said, "Mr. President, they demand your surrender." I looked at her, then at the radio crackling with their voices heavy with the same tone my ancestors heard from colonizers long ago. That tone that says, "Submit." The air still smelled of tea, a peaceful morning shattered by arrogance. Behind me hung the portraits of Sankara, the heroes who refused to kneel. Their eyes seemed alive, watching, reminding me that leadership is not comfort, it is sacrifice. Then came their loudspeaker, a foreign machine shouting through our African air, "President Traoré, surrender yourself." Their broken French made their message sound even more broken. But outside those walls, children gathered by the gates, eyes wide, hearts awake. Women from the market came singing the old songs of resistance, voices rising like a storm. The call to prayer joined their chants, blending faith with defiance. Even the dogs barked, not in fear but in protest. And as the captain of those foreign soldiers looked at his watch, questioning the orders of his own soul, I stood there, silent, yet unshaken, because the heart of Africa does not surrender. The 30-minute deadline felt eternal, and yet painfully short. Outside my palace, I watched my people gather, not with weapons but with courage. Old men walked forward on trembling legs, their faces marked by the long scars of colonial chains and the endless struggle to stay free. Young mothers raised their children high, offering them to the wind, to the land, to their president, as if to say, "We will protect our future, even if it costs our lives." The captain who came with orders of power did not expect this. His manuals had no chapter for the soul of Africa. He had been warned of resistance, but not of unity, not of love strong enough to silence fear. Then I heard it, the beating of drums. Not military drums, but the rhythm of our ancestors. The rhythm that once called warriors to rise, not for conquest, but for dignity. Somewhere beyond those walls, a heartbeat became a movement. Mama Fatou, with her silver hair shining under the sun, led the women of this land. Spoons and pots became their drums. Their chants rose like thunder. Her cracked voice carried the spirit of the women who once faced the colonizers barefoot, unbroken. Behind her, the youth, our students, linked arms, eyes burning with the fire of hope. They stood not just for me, but for the generations yet to come. Their clothes were torn, but their will was whole. Taxi drivers left their engines running in the dust, running instead toward the palace, joining the living river that flowed to defend what is theirs. From every street corner, from every home, came voices, thousands of them calling my name, calling for freedom. The smell of burning tires rose into the morning air. Not destruction, but declaration, a sign that this land belongs to its people. Even the street children, those the world never sees, stepped out from shadows, raising their small fists and louder voices. And the foreign captain, peering through his scope, saw what his orders had not told him, that a nation united cannot be conquered, that what stood before him was not a crowd, it was a people awake. His radio came alive with panic, voices from every direction, soldiers reporting the same impossible truth. They are unarmed, but they are not moving. Around every gate, every road, my people stood like shields of flesh and spirit. Old women sat before their tanks, their hands joined in prayer, their eyes calm. They did not tremble. They had buried sons in old wars. They would not surrender the rest to a new one. Their colorful head wraps shone under the sun like crowns, the crowns of mothers who protect life itself. Behind them, the youth raised their phones, turning this moment into light, a light that no censorship could hide. The whole world was watching. That captain, his orders trained him to fight armies, not grandmothers humming lullabies in front of armored steel. His finger hovered over the radio, but his heart hesitated, because in those women, he saw the face of his own grandmother far away in Texas. For the first time, he realized he was not fighting enemies. He was standing before humanity. From my balcony, I watched all of this unfold, and my heart swelled with both pride and fear. Workers from the textile mill stood shoulder to shoulder at the gates, their uniforms shining against the cold green of foreign vehicles. Teachers, farmers, drivers, all stood as one, united not by weapons, but by love for their soil. Their courage brought tears to my eyes. Yet within that pride came a weight, the kind that presses on every leader's chest. One wrong word, one spark, and this moment could turn from peace. The sun rose higher. Its light cast long shadows over the crowd, as if the land itself reached out to protect its children. From every path I saw more coming, on foot, on donkey carts, in crowded taxis, an entire nation answering the call without needing to hear it. The American soldiers stood frozen. They were trained for combat, but what stood before them was not war, it was truth. Sergeant Williams, barely more than a boy, looked at a child holding a small Burkina flag and a wilted flower. The boy smiled, innocent, fearless. He offered both flag and flower to the man in uniform. And then something miraculous happened. The people began to sing. The anthem rose from the dust in Maori and French, in Diola, a harmony more powerful than any weapon forged by man. Their technology, their firepower, their strategy, all of it became meaningless before people who had chosen to die standing rather than live kneeling. Over the radio, I could hear their commanders shouting, their controls slipping away, and somewhere in that confusion I saw it. A soldier's eyes softening, the beginning of understanding, the first crack in the armor of arrogance. Assuming I would survive whatever came next, I went deep inside the palace, into the old chamber that still breathed the air of my ancestors. There I knelt on a woven mat before a small altar, towery shells glimmering, incense burning softly. The walls were not marble or gold, they were mud brick, the same earth that sheltered the kings of the Mossi, long before the colonizers arrived. Elder Yamba entered quietly, carrying a leather pouch, the same pouch that had passed through the hands of resistance leaders for generations. His hands trembled, not from age, but from the weight of what was unfolding. Gently he placed a wooden mask on the altar. In the flicker of candlelight, its eyes seemed alive, as if the spirits within were watching, waiting. Outside I could still hear the chants of my people, their voices drifting through the walls like sacred wind, the smoke of incense mixed with the scent of red clay. It was as though the land itself had to come inside to witness this moment. Elder Yamba spoke softly and more. Your great-grandfather fought the French with nothing but his will, to blessing of those who came before him. His fingers moved through the dust, drawing symbols older than writing, the language of our memory, of strength. I closed my eyes. I felt the weight of all those before me settle upon my shoulders, heavy but familiar. In that silence I saw the smile of Sankara. I heard the thunder of Lumumba. I felt the pulse of every African soul that ever refused to bow. The mask on the altar glowed faintly in the dim light, as Yamba began to chant, the ancient tongue of Mossi warriors, rising again after centuries of silence. The very walls seemed to lean closer, whispering secrets of endurance, of survival. And in that moment my fear began to fade, dissolving into something far greater than myself, a power older than any empire, a calm older than war. And the wind came, strong, sudden, rattling the shutters, carrying the scent of baobab blossoms and distant rain. It was as if the ancestors themselves had answered. Elder Yamba's eyes widened as the air itself seemed to change. He understood the sign before I did. His trembling voice rose with certainty. They are speaking to you, my son. They say true power is not in weapons or foreign praise. It lives in the bond between a leader and his people. I opened my eyes. The candles were burning higher, their flames moving in patterns that made no sense to the world of physics but perfect sense to the world of spirit. Outside the noise had shifted. What was once shouting now sounded like celebration, as if my people, without seeing me, could already feel the change within me. A small bird landed on the windowsill. It sang 3 clear notes, then flew toward the rising sun. In our tradition, that was no accident. The ancestors had spoken. They had chosen their champion. I rose from the mat, and the fear that had gripped me began to flow away, leaving only calm. The wooden mask caught the sunlight and for a moment seemed to smile. Elder Yamba placed something in my palm, a small amulet wrapped in gold thread, a piece of fallen star that had guarded Mossi kings for centuries. He said, your words must echo through history, like the voices of those who freed Africa once before. His tone was no longer frail. It carried the weight of generations. I understood this was not only about my presidency. It was about every nation that had ever dared to call itself free. The amulet felt heavy in my hand, like a promise between earth and sky, a reminder that even the heavens were watching. So I walked out of the chamber, my steps steady, my heart clear. The doors opened and the light of morning embraced me. When I stepped into the open courtyard, my people saw me, and their roar shook the air. But I lifted my hand and 10,000 voices fell silent, as if the land itself had obeyed. In my left hand I held a staff carved from the sacred baobab, the tree that endures every season. In my right, a microphone that would carry my words across Africa and beyond. My white robe shone beneath the sun, bright against the dull green of the foreign uniforms that surrounded us. In that stillness I felt it, not power born of fear but of faith. The moment before history, Captain Rodriguez raised his binoculars, expecting to find fear, or maybe defiance in the president's eyes. But what he saw instead unsettled him, a calm so steady it made his finger tremble on the trigger. Inside Traoré's pocket the ancestral amulet pulsed softly, its warmth reminding him that he stood not as one man, but as the voice of generations, who refused to kneel elder. Yambo watched from the palace steps, a fond smile crossing his weathered face. He could feel the ancient power awakening in his leader, the same spirit that, anima de MPS tremble. Captain Rodriguez. Traoré's voice thundered across the courtyard, knowing the soldier's name without ever having met him. The sound froze the entire battalion. Soldiers exchanged nervous glances. They had expected surrender or resistance, no recognition. I know why you are here, the president continued, his English sharp and deliberate, and I know the orders you carry from men who have never touched African soil. Behind him, the crowd swayed like a living sea, their breath moving in rhythm with his heartbeat. Rodriguez gripped his radio, unsure whether to report or to listen. The voices in his earpiece barked for action, but something in the president's tone made him hesitate. The sun climbed higher, casting Traoré's shadow long across the red dust, like the outline of a giant carved by destiny itself. Then, with the calm of a man who feared nothing, Traoré said, "But I have a counter-proposal, one your Pentagon never imagined." He reached into his robe, and instead of a weapon, pulled out a single white paper glowing in the morning light. I challenge the President of the United States to meet me here, in Ouagadougou, within 7 days to debate the future of Africa, before the eyes of the world. His voice rolled through the compound like thunder from the ancestors themselves. The crowd exploded in disbelief and awe, while American soldiers froze, unable to process the defiance of a man they had, committed to capturar. Rodriguez's radio erupted with frantic voices from command, demanding clarity, but the captain couldn't look away. The paper in Traoré's hand fluttered like a flag of defiance. Even the dogs on the street went silent, as if the earth itself paused to listen. In that moment, Rodriguez felt his mission slipping away. The operation had turned from a military strike into a moment of history. He no longer saw an enemy. He saw a man who had forced the world to listen. The air was charged electric. The crowd was no longer afraid. They were waiting not for orders, but for destiny. Traoré stood tall, eyes blazing with conviction, the amulet's light burning faintly beneath his robe. Both men, the soldier and the president, knew that what had just happened would echo across generations. Rodriguez's finger hovered over the transmit button, his superior screaming in his ear, but his mind frozen between duty and respect. Around him, thousands of civilians formed a human wall, standing unarmed between their leader and the foreign army. The morning heat pressed down on his body, but the sweat running down his face was not from the sun. It was from witnessing history being rewritten by the very man he was ordered to silence. Sergeant William shifted nervously, his weapon now lowered, his eyes drawn to the children laughing at their parents' feet. The order had been cleared 12 hours ago. Extract Traoré by any means necessary. But now, under the roar of CNN helicopters and the flashing cameras of Al Jazeera, those orders were dissolving like dust in a morning wind. "Sir, what are our instructions?" the young sergeant whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of a situation his training had never prepared him for. Captain Rodriguez, a man hardened by 3 tours in Afghanistan, suddenly found himself facing a different kind of battlefield, one where truth, not bullets, decided the victor. The president's challenge had turned what began as a military extraction into a global reckoning. Through his earpiece, Rodriguez could hear chaos. Washington voices colliding in panic, State Department and Pentagon locked in argument, every second stretched into eternity. And below him the crowd's chants grew louder, not angry now but unified, harmonic, carrying an energy that no weapon could silence. His communications officer pressed a satellite phone into his hand, a direct line to Washington, blinking red, like the heartbeat of a dying command. The captain could feel the weight of the world pressing against his chest. From the top of his Humvee he saw the scene unfold before him like a painting, alive with spirit, flags waving from rooftops, news cameras flashing, the entire city rising as one voice of defiance. He knew then that whatever choice he made, the world was watching. His military instinct screamed, "Follow orders." His conscience whispered, "Some orders are not meant to be followed." Through the crowd, his eyes met those of an elderly woman, clutching a faded photograph of her fallen son. Tears streaked her face, but in her eyes burned pride, the same kind his own mother once carried when A left home to serve. In that instant, the captain understood. The radio crackled with Washington's confusion, commands turning to noise. Rodriguez lifted his hand slowly, pulled the earpiece from his ear, and let it fall to the red dust below. "Stand down," he said at last. His voice carried across the line of soldiers, calm, steady, unshakable. Relief spread through the ranks like a wave. Rifles lowered, shoulders eased. For the first time, they were not soldiers of empire. They were men answering to their own humanity. In the silence that followed, the air felt different. The battlefield had become sacred ground. And somewhere within the palace walls, Ibrahim Traoré raised his gaze toward the horizon, knowing that victory does not always come through war, sometimes it comes through awakening.